So it wasn't wasted work, but it certainly did not ever turn into what I hoped it would. The other thing about museum work, the behind-the-scenes part, is what many curators really like, and what I really enjoyed for a long time was collecting. And so you build collections, and there you fail as often as not. You know, there are things you can't collect, there are things you hope to get and nobody will give you. Collecting is one of the great mysteries of museum work. And sort of the other half of the curator's work is how do you build collections. I had colleagues who were much better at it than I was. And part of this is just being charming and convincing people to give you their family stuff or whatever it might be. It's hard work, and I never quite figured out how to do it right, I don't think. There are lots of great collections that got away that maybe I could have gotten if I worked a little bit harder at it. I'm actually going to teach a course next semester. I'm going to teach on collecting and collections and see if I can figure out what I should have been doing all that time. It's an art rather than a science. It's really interesting and hard work.
Do you think the same holds for small museums?
Oh, I think so. I think that there's always, the big challenge in many small museums is there's just not the resources to do what you want to do. People who work at the museums have wonderful ideas, but when push comes to shove, you just don't have any money to do it. And so a lot of people's time is spent raising money, and you're lucky if you ask 20 people and one of them gives you money. You have to be used to failing all the time in that world. Small museums have different issues around collecting, and that they often don't have the space to collect, so they have a hard time bringing in the collections that they want, or treating them right if they do. So I guess museums have so many ways to fail. It's really just remarkable. Just like academia, but there's lots of ways to fail in this business.
What would you suggest right now for small institutions, any institutions, I guess, but I'm thinking especially about small institutions in Philadelphia who are facing a dire funding climate? What strategies?
This is a good question. I wish I knew the answer. One answer that everyone talks about is working together more. Rhode Island is a very small state that thinks it's a very big state. And so every little town, and there's 30-some little towns, has its own historical society. Every organization that sort of does their own thing. And one of the things we've tried to do at the John Nicholas Brown Center is to be a center for some of these places, to provide ways for them to work together. It has not been easy. Some of them like to be on their own. So working together is one. In Philadelphia, the Pew Charitable Trust has done wonderful work trying to pull people together, trying to get people to work together on things. And it's a model in some ways. The other thing, thinking about Philadelphia, you warned me about Philadelphia, and I've sort of kept an eye on it because they would come by and visit every so often. Philadelphia has pulled off, has succeeded in things that I thought they would never succeed in. And so maybe one of the answers to that is be really, really bold and just step out in new ways nobody's thought about before. So the places that come to mind there are Eastern State Penitentiary. I remember when that was starting up and I heard about it, I said, that's the craziest idea. That'll never work. Part of that is coming from the Smithsonian, which is not a place to do wildly crazy things. But the notion of taking a decaying penitentiary that's falling down, that is, at the time anyway, in a pretty bad neighborhood, and saying, we're going to turn this into a museum and get thousands of people a year through here. By the way, they'll have to wear hard hats, they'll have to sign a release. They're going to see some sort of odd art inside instead of real history. At the time it just seemed so crazy, but it was so bold that they pulled it off. It's sort of amazing.
How many of you have been to Eastern State?
All right, you've all got to go to Eastern State. It is an astonishing place. I don't know that it's a model for any place else. It's really peculiar in many ways, but it is a model of being bold and pulling it off. The other place that I visited is the Wagner Free Institute of Science. And I went there because I told you I grew up in Philadelphia. My father, as a kid, lived right nearby, and he went, after school, he went there all the time. This was sort of where he got started learning about science. And he was enormously fond of the place, although I think he may have not gone for 40 or 50 years after moving out of the neighborhood. And he took me there one time, and I talked to the people. I said, no way you could ever make this place work. This was, at the time, it was, as I remember, it's the wrong audience to have vague memories of. It was students from Penn, from the History of Science program at Penn, who sort of rediscovered the place and were working there. And they were going to open this up, and they were going to turn it into an adult and kids education place for the neighborhood again, just like it was. And they were going to keep this amazing historic exhibit as an exhibit of history of museums, really. And it just seemed so unlikely and so crazy and so bold, and so far they've pulled it off. So maybe the Philadelphia model is to do wild and crazy things and make them happen. I don't know. Have people been to the Wagner Free Institute? Another place. It's just an astonishing place, and it's not far from here, and it's right at the edge of the campus. It's just a few blocks away, and it is. Partly from my interest in the history of museums, it's just you've got to go see it, but partly as a model of re-engaging with the community, of saying, this is a place where local school kids can come and learn about science again, and local adults can learn about science. It's true to its history, it's true to its 150-year-old mission, but it's also doing something that the community needs. And it's an amazing project.
Maybe this is a good point to ask if anybody has questions. Oh.
Yeah, I do. I was really interested in what you said about the Eastern Penitentiary, because it got back to something you said at the very beginning. You said museums are now about audiences and then you hesitated a second and you said social spaces, but I thought you were going to say and experiences. And I know when I go to museums now, you often see someone whose title is Director of User Experience. And I wonder if now, for libraries and museums, it's becoming important to think more about the experience people have and less about whether they're learning the minutiae of all the artifacts that are there. And perhaps you can comment on the museum, which is one of our newer museums, which, when you go there, it seems like there are almost no artifacts and it's all multimedia.
Yeah, so this is the hot question in the museum world. Is it about experiences? Is it about artifacts? Is it about learning? Is it about doing things? And one answer is it's about all of those things. But I've stayed away from the word experiences and talked about social spaces or maybe social experiences. Because one of the big challenges for any medium today is how do you compete with what somebody can do sitting at home looking at a screen? And there's lots you can do sitting at home looking at a screen. If you look at the numbers, that's where everybody's spending their time. And so one way museums tried to compete with that for a long time is you put screens in museums. And I remember, there actually was an exhibit on volcanoes and natural history at the Smithsonian a long time ago. And it was a really good exhibit. It was full of objects. It was full of experiences. It was full of things. And 80% of the people in that space were sitting there and watching a TV show about volcanoes, which was really a fascinating show. And, it was great, and it was nice that they were doing it. But it's not something you have to do in a museum. You can do that at home. So what you've got in a museum are real things and a place for some sort of social interaction. And I'd argue actually that libraries may be thinking along the same ways. That if you look at what goes on in university libraries especially, they are about places students come together and do work. The Brown Library is building more and more spaces for group projects for students to work together. And museums are places where you get together and you have an experience either as a family group or as a social group, and you make it into something more than you can do sitting at home watching a screen. So the interesting things that are going on in screens in museums right now are the things that you do as a group. The fad, the interactive fad in museums right now is table computing. So you have either a table this size or a table 25 feet long at the World War I Museum out in Kansas City. And you have a whole group of a whole class or a whole family, and they interact with things, with virtual things, with digital images on the screen, but they do it as a group, something you can't do at home as easily. I am sure that the Connect and the Wii will make their way into museums because you do this sort of physical interaction with screens in the museum. You combine that with objects in some way, and you've got something that you can't do anyplace else. But objects alone aren't enough. The screens aren't enough. It's an experience, but it's got to be a kind of experience that plays to the strengths of museums, and that's what makes it so much fun and such a challenge.
Other questions?
Earlier you talked about putting pictures up, a professor who put up pictures on Flickr and had people tagging them. Do you feel that that idea can work for normal artifacts? I mean, or would we end up with something kind of like Wikipedia, where I mean, I know you have to cite things with Wikipedia, but still, things fall through the cracks.
Yeah, I am a big fan of Wikipedia. Me too. Much to the dismay of some of my historian colleagues. If we could end up with objects that were curated like Wikipedia is, I think that would be great. There's the studies that have been done on this. The Library of Congress did a wonderful study when they put up a couple of tens of thousands of images on Flickr and found that for the most part, the comments they got, the noting, the tagging, the noting of the images was pretty good and pretty useful. There was some, there's always some spamming, but there was a lot of interesting stuff as well. Nobody has yet figured out how to take that material from Flickr and give it back into the library, which is the next challenge maybe. The biggest challenge for curators in museums today is trying to negotiate that line between being the expert and helping the audience to participate as experts in their own way. And that's really an interesting challenge. How do you draw, you're a curator because you know a lot. You're an expert in some way. On the other hand, you're not there to lecture people. People don't come to museums to be lectured at for the most part. They're there to participate in shaping their own knowledge. And they have their own kinds of expertise. And there's a million ways, a million gradations of where to draw that line. From, you can go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and read art historian pieces on walls, to you can go to the Hong Kong Community Museum, which is one of my favorite community museums. And it's just all about people putting out their own stuff, and everybody in the neighborhood can bring things over and tell them about it. It's no expertise at all. And there's each museum will have to find their own area there. Online, you can do all of those things in different ways. You can have the official voice of the museum. You can have the purely public part. You can have an edited version of that. The National Postal Museum has an open website, a semi-open website, where if you ask for permission, you're allowed to post, if you can prove that you're knowledgeable in the world of stamps. That way they can get the whole world to help them catalog their collection. It's an interesting thing that we're just figuring out now, is where to draw those lines.